Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to meet you all in this Asian economic community. My name is Teguh Pradisastra, and about in an hour I will moderate this panel discussion. The theme for this Asian economic community panel discussion is harnessing the growth opportunity of Asian economic integration. And here with me, Mrs. Ellison, Bruce Del Tail, Mr. Kerry Mark, Mrs. Cindy Djojonegoro, and Pak Roni Setyawan, and also okay, thank you. We will discuss about an exploration of the growth opportunity afforded by Asian economic integration as well as the potential barriers to progress. What are the greatest opportunities for organizations with Asian economic integration, and what specific challenges must overcome? What does EAC mean for merger and acquisition activities for the region? How will EAC goals of increased supply chain efficiency be met? And what are the gaps to be overcome to harness the potential?
We have been helping small enterprises in funding and mentorship. So I think we perceive the AAC as well. It's a new challenge for us. Also, well, at the same time, it gives us opportunity. I mean, for these small enterprises, but. We are also need to step up the quality of our entrepreneurs in terms of funding and mentorship, because while they need, as for the bigger challenge they face, they need to be able to compete with all these products from such as Thailand, Malaysia. Like in some of our portfolios are the manufacturer of snack, food. And I think compared to Thai snacks, they are much more interesting, perhaps, and in terms of prices, we need to be able to compete with them. Because, well, yes, they have bigger markets, but on these days, even for the local markets, they have to penetrate the markets not that easy. So I think we also need to think about this aspect. So maybe it's also a good thing for these big enterprises to help these small enterprises to be able to penetrate the market, to distribute their products, because it's a challenge they have to face for when the AAC come into effect in 2015.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Mok, maybe you want to say something?
No, I think I presented earlier about the whole market opportunity for companies. One thing for sure, if we talk about competition, it's definitely going to rise. If you're an Indonesian company, you know everybody's looking at Indonesia as a big growth market. 200+ million people. So you expect more investments to come into Indonesia. The question is, can Indonesia improve its manufacturing capability so that you can actually produce more for whole of ASEAN? Given that you have such a strong big base here, are you able to take advantage of that in terms of the scale to then distribute your products across ASEAN? But for that to happen, you do need to improve your manufacturing capability, the training around the people, the technology that's required to be very efficient in the way you manufacture. And then clearly from a supply chain standpoint, your ports and road infrastructure will be, and airport infrastructure will be crucial, because you want to get the goods out in a more efficient manner to the rest of ASEAN. So, there's a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, competition coming. And for me, I do think that there is a big advantage being such a large country with a huge consumer demand, you can turn that to advantage with very, very smart investments and very deliberate policies to encourage things like that. So I think those are some of the pointers I think from an Indonesian standpoint will be important.
Thank you, Mr. Mo. And for Mr. Bruce Del Tail, is it right? Yeah, okay. You are an expert of merger and acquisition. What do you see as being part of the greatest opportunity for organization for Asian economic integration?
So thank you. Good morning, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to put things in perspective a little bit. Businesses in Indonesia or in other countries, they didn't wait for AEC to happen to do M&A. And in fact, I think earlier we were talking about the parallel with what happened in the European Union. We haven't necessarily seen volume of M&A in value or in number of deals going up in parallel with the building of the European Union. So what is it telling us? It's telling us that at the end of the day, business players will be looking for stability and ability to actually perform the M&A without any particular obstacles. So in an ideal world, since 2 years ago, we should have seen a huge rise of M&A everywhere in ASEAN and across ASEAN, anticipating AEC. Has it been the case? It hasn't really been the case. We've seen increase of M&A in some sectors, in some countries, but it hasn't been the case. Now, if we look at Indonesia, as M&A being, did M&A grow in 2013? Would you know? Would you know? Cindy probably knows that 2013 was, 2012 and 2013 was actually a challenging year for M&A. And for what reason? And I'm getting back to that point on stability and ability to have some visibility of what's happening. Because of some measures that were taken for good or bad reasons by Indonesia on a number of sectors. So we're all aware of some high-profile examples in the banking industry or in the mining and resources industries. And that was happening a year before, or a couple of years before AEC is actually being implemented. So I think our role here is to help you embrace AEC, but at the same time understand what could be the obstacles, even though AEC is here. Alison at the beginning of the presentation mentioned that AEC will be successful if business community embraces it. And we do believe, and I'll make the point on M&A in a second, that AEC will be successful if governments also embraces it. So the question is the following. At the end of the day, AEC is a framework, and each individual government actually can decide to go as fast as they want and keep some independence and some distance with some of the regulation or guidelines, principles from AEC. So if we're talking about Indonesia, now that we are past the whole Pemilu episode, and then the new government is going to take office at the end of the month, it's going to be very interesting to see if on a sector basis, some of the new regulations, the new laws will be following what AEC is actually requesting, or not requesting, but the guidelines that are behind the AEC. So if that happens, yes, M&A will continue to grow in Indonesia, as it was the case over the past few months, but it will grow exponentially because AEC will turbocharge what's happening in the M&A space. So I can continue on that, or maybe have others add to this. Okay, so then stability, embracing AEC, having some regulations on a sector-per-sector basis, and what we're going to see happening is two things. The first thing is, if ASEAN didn't exist, and if tomorrow Indonesia were behind its own borders, Indonesia would still be a very successful country because the country is so large and the opportunities are so big that we would still see some consolidation in some sectors. And that is very natural. And earlier I think we mentioned perhaps Indonesia was not completely ready or didn't anticipate AEC to start doing acquisition outside Indonesia. It's simply because the market here is so large that there are tons of opportunities. So, will Indonesian companies take advantage of AEC to go outside Indonesia, for instance? The answer is yes. Will it happen immediately? Probably not. I do believe that what's going to be important, and Accenture believes that what's going to be important, is that Indonesian players across industries, we need to respond to the threat of, to Cindy's point, players from Thailand, from Malaysia, from other countries that have no other choice but coming here to continue to grow. So we see a number of signs of preparation, getting ready for this, such as perhaps further consolidation in the banking industry, for instance, to be in a position to resist to this. Perhaps additional changes in the investment framework in oil and gas or in mining in order to be able to resist to this. So that will be the first cause of M&A, I would say, initiatives coming from the Indonesian companies. And in a second phase, and then we're talking 2017, 18, 19, then a more proactive way of going after markets, talent, new consumers, new technology outside Indonesia.
I need to add some point from Bruce's perspective. Me as I'm also a legal consultant, so in addition to Bruce's presentation, I'd like to address the legal issue of the M&A in the upcoming AAC structure. I believe that we have to prepare our legal infrastructure because Southeast Asia has different legal systems. Some countries adapt civil law and some other countries adapt the Commonwealth system. And so we have to think on the contractual arrangement between this merger when merger acquisition happen, because in Indonesia we adapt the civil law, and for instance Malaysia has the Commonwealth law. So when those two companies come into effect, there is always this contractual agreement with which governing law that we are going to follow, and we have this basic difference between civil law and Commonwealth law, such as the trust, concept of trust. Civil law doesn't have the concept of trust, as well as indemnity concept. There is differences between civil law and Commonwealth law, and as we know, those two concepts actually usually will be essential in those contractual arrangement when there is a merger and acquisition between two companies. So we have to address this in the legal infrastructure in preparing all these countries when AAC comes into effect.
Thank you, Cindy. Maybe Alison, you want to add something about this?
Sure, thank you. I mean, I'm just kind of stepping back. I think when we look at the opportunities are different by sector, different by type of company, again, multinational versus local. If you are looking at going out, clearly there are opportunities that Kerry spoke about, of moving your manufacturing, of looking at more efficient supply chain. For Indonesia, I said we have been and visited Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. We've had discussions with business leaders and with governments in all of these countries. And every one of them is concerned about Indonesia and what Indonesia is doing. So Indonesia is seen as key, absolutely key to AEC. And I think for companies in Indonesia, when I speak with companies in Indonesia, interestingly, Indonesian companies are less confident about Indonesia than people outside of Indonesia. And that is interesting for me. And I think one of the things that Indonesian companies need to remember is, even with all of the challenges, Indonesian companies are in Indonesia today, and everybody wants to come here. So the opportunity and the impetus will be the fact that there is going to be more competition. This is a great opportunity for Indonesian companies to look at improving, to look at doing things differently, to embrace some of the change. And certainly, again, we see our clients and we see people starting to do that. The statistics showed that people are looking at changes already, particularly in Indonesia. One point that hasn't come across, and I think is important, is that the business community is critical to the success of any economic community or any union. The other thing that is very important is the people, and what is happening with the people and how the people embrace the change. And to Cindy's point, we had a long discussion in Malaysia and in Thailand about how the business community can help, particularly entrepreneurs, how the business community can come together and help small, micro and mini entrepreneurs with their businesses and really take advantage of some of the changes. And you know, the business community as well as government have an obligation to help with some of that. So again, you know, there's opportunities for big companies, but also big companies taking the lead in helping smaller companies. Opportunities for funding, but also for support and education, and I think that's something that, you know, the business community should be thinking about, as well as the opportunities for their own business.
Morning. I fully agree with what Alison mentioned earlier. In terms of the market, I do believe that it's a big opportunity for Indonesia companies to tap into the ASEAN countries. Because if we add on ASEAN plus the China and India, then it's already add up 37% of the global population. So it's a big opportunity for Indonesia company to step up and then get into the market. In terms of from the supply chain context, then we do have a lot of leverage as well as a lot of opportunities in terms of planning, procuring, sourcing, as well as the network distribution, whereby with the ASEAN Economic Community being opened up in end of 2015, that we can do more on terms of the regional sourcing, as well as regional manufacturing, and then we have a much bigger footprint that we can go into the market.
And what is the barrier to AEC goals that could potentially impede progress?
That's a good question. The specific challenges that have to be overcome would be infrastructure. That's a thing that has been discussed over and over again. And the specific challenge would be alignment in terms of the regulations. When it comes to the ASEAN single window, then the government as well as the private industry have to work together, as well as at the country level, as well as at the regional level, whereby then they can come up with the standardized in terms of the custom procedure, in terms of the HS code, in terms of the all the non-tariff barriers have to be discussed and then agreed moving forward. And on top of that one, the logistic cost and the infrastructure itself also will be a challenge that have to be taken out, especially for the small medium enterprise, because then they have to extend the footprints as well as their product services to the ASEAN countries. That's going to be a challenge for them to be able to overcome these issues.
Okay. And ASEAN will impact supply chain and operation in a number of areas. What do you think is the most important thing business can do to be prepared?
On that one would be the most critical one. I would say the business efficiency that have to be created as a region, in which the regulatory convergence in terms of streamlining all the scattered standards, measures, system that we have today. I think that this deepening the integration is all about streamlining all this regulation that we have today.
Thank you. It is Mr. Roni Setyawan that I have forget to introduce to you. Everybody's here. Mr. Roni Setyawan has served as Chief Supply Chain Officer at PT Trakindo Utama since January 2014. He holds a bachelor degree from Northern University, USA, and Master of Science degree in Transportation from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, USA. Now, I'm moving to Cindy again. Cindy. What is the Asian economic community bringing in the context of merger and acquisition activities?
Okay, I think it's also a big opportunities for Indonesian companies to invest in other to acquire another businesses in other countries, as well as us getting new investment from other countries. So there will be transfer of technology, obviously, as well as fund, mentoring, and well, I do hope that these opportunities will also bring, specifically from angel investor point of view, that I'm hoping that they will bring fresh funds, obviously, because we have many interesting products that other countries doesn't have, such as traditional snacks, traditional handicraft, right? And I'm hoping perhaps the transfer of technology and skills, such as maybe from Vietnam, because they're very good in terms of motoric skill. Maybe from Thailand for the productivity, as well as fresh funds. So I do hope that this will bring the small enterprises in Indonesia, again, opportunities and possibility to grow. And actually more important than funding skills, what we need is also channel to distribute the products, because no matter how good the product that we have, no matter how interesting the product that we have, if we cannot channel it into the market, then there will be waste. So we need the big corporations to help the small enterprises, to help these small enterprises to penetrate into the market, both local and regional.
So it is partnership.
Yes, partnership and up until the end, up until the penetration into the market.
Thank you, Cindy. Cindy is a law graduate of the University of Indonesia Law School with specialization in business law. He also studied in Stanford Law School and received juridical science master. She is skilled in the legal matter of infrastructure projects such as toll roads, yes, power plant, water supply, harbors and airport, but also equally well in merger and acquisition. That's why I asked about merger and acquisition. General corporate, refinancing, structuring, and bankruptcy. Yeah. And I moved to Bruce. Bruce, about merger and acquisition. What are the advantages on risks of merger and acquisition, especially toward the EAC in 2015 implementation?
So I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. So I'll bounce on what Cindy just said on partnership. I think AAC, as we said earlier, we will not necessarily see a boost in M&A right away after AAC, but AAC will enable partnerships. And if we take a few examples, when Pertamina, for instance, requires help in the petrochemical space and is being supported by PTT from Thailand, that happened before AAC, But this kind of cooperation, which is absolutely critical for Indonesia as a country, and in terms of overall value creation in Indonesia, will be made even easier with AEC. So that's one thing. The second point is exactly what Cindy said. The fabric of the economy in Indonesia is a lot based on small and medium enterprises that will be able to actually forge partnerships through AEC and be in a position to perhaps merge with them. Three is what we will see, and we mentioned that a little bit earlier on some consolidation or changes in industries. For instance, let's talk about the banking industry and what could happen with the state-owned banks or the other 120 banks that actually are still operating in Indonesia and that will need one way or another to work together in order to be stronger and develop competitive advantage in Indonesia as against others. So I don't see risk in particular. I don't see specific risk. I see opportunities. I think the risk will be, as we mentioned earlier, in the ability to take advantage of those opportunities and make that happen very quickly from a regulation standpoint, from an integration standpoint, and being able to follow through with those M&A deals.
Yeah, thank you. I move to Carrie Mock. Carrie is Managing Director with the Accenture Strategy, Operation and Practice in Asia. He spent the past 18 years helping global MNCs with improving their business performance, particularly in the area of supply chains management in IPEC. Mr. Mock, which type of companies, either in terms of industries and organizational characteristics, stand to gain the most from Asia economic integration?
That's a tough question. Well, in my area of work, I speak to many different group of clients and all that. The one thing that everybody is very interested in is logistics. Yes. We all know that there's a lot that can be done for Indonesia. So, if you look at the rankings of, you compare all the ASEAN countries, where is Indonesia compared to the rest? In terms of the performance, it's actually even below Vietnam, which is slightly higher than Indonesia. Number one out there is obviously is Singapore. So, but whilst it's at a level, it gives people a lot of interest in that area, and many companies, including private equity companies, are interested about trying to create a logistics platform to cover Indonesia. If you look at the market today, and this is very similar to emerging economies in the past, in India, China as well. Most of the logistics companies are quite fragmented. A lot of them are small. You think about who actually in Indonesia has a Indonesia-wide logistics platform that can bring your goods anywhere in Indonesia in the most efficient and effective manner. You'd be hard-pressed to think of companies that can do that really well. So there lies an opportunity. If Indonesia is going to play a big role in AAC and the growth of it, and with more companies coming in, with the rise of consumer consumption, that's the opportunity. So the company that can come in and aggregate and invest in a platform, that's the company that's going to win. And if I hear private equity companies interested in doing things like this, there's an opportunity, because those guys are out there looking for an opportunity to make money. So if they can come in there and buy up smaller companies and then aggregate and utilize technology and create a single platform to service the Indonesian market, then that's going to be a winner. So I do think the logistics industry is primed for growth. It's an industry where when you can bring in more technology, more solutions, know-how, it's going to be good. So don't think of it as discrete services around warehousing, transport, air freight, sea freight. Think of it as a solution. Ultimately, the clients out there will buy a solution. The solution means you must be able to tie in an end-to-end solution to your customer. So I believe with that focus in there, I do think this industry is poised for a lot of changes and investments going forward.
Thank you. you have a lot of experience with MNC. Is it right?
Yes.
Will Asian economic integration have the same implication for large local companies as MNCs? And if there are any difference, what are they?
I think if I look at MNCs and local companies, when I look at different MNCs, they all have very different operating models as well, and it's very interesting. Sometimes for a particular operating model, it's very interesting for some companies, and for others it's not so interesting. So they all have very different operating models. But one key trend that I do see going forward, right, at least amongst MNCs, is that they're all trying to aggregate and they're trying to standardize. They're trying to simplify their business operations. Notwithstanding the fact that they're operating in multiple countries, there is a big effort to try and standardize processes and systems so that as a company they get a better view of their operations, they get a better view of how they operate, how the supply chain moves as well. And simplicity is actually a good thing. As you operate in a more complex environment, being able to simplify your processes and allow you to get visibility is a big advantage. So I do see MNCs moving towards that direction. And I guess for Indonesian companies, as you are looking to grow, you have the chance to get that right straight away. Because when you look at some of the MNCs, they have grown through acquisitions, they have gone through different means, and obviously through different phases of growth. And sometimes, when you're growing so quickly, you don't really think about setting a platform. But as you now have the chance to tap demand, you can think about your operating model and how do you set yourself up to grow efficiently, right? It's something that I think most Indonesian companies should think about. If you want to be present in around ASEAN countries, how do you manage that? How do you put a platform where you can manage that from a central location in Indonesia, get very clear insights of how your operating units operate? It's a tremendous business advantage.
Thank you, Kerry. I know the audience have no patience to wait to ask you, the panelists. So now the times for 3 audience, please. Yeah, one question. Your name and your question, and to whom, please. Panitia, mic.
Majalah from Bank Mandiri. So the question is, I think we talk a lot about Asian economic community, but I think Alison brought up one interesting point, which was different industry is actually going to experience differently. So my question is to the panelists, what do you think are the industries in Indonesia that will become more vulnerable to the attacks of people who is actually coming from outside of Indonesia? And what industries are actually going to be able to benefit and take the opportunities more by the opening up of the ASEAN economic community? So that is actually, so maybe you can touch on, what do you think are the industries that have better competitive advantage in Indonesia and better, like if you talk about supply chain, logistical advantages, whether they have actually better talents in Indonesia, whatever. I think the question is, because I work for a bank, so one of the key things that I'm actually very interested is, when the ASEAN economic community is actually going to fall into place next year, there must be some industries that are actually becoming more vulnerable than others, and who are those winners and who are actually going to be the losers in Indonesia. And for those Indonesian players, where are the sectors that Indonesian can actually be more of a winner and be able to expand regionally into other countries around the region? So that is actually one question. The second question would be, I think regulation is actually going to be a big thing. Despite the fact that ASEAN economic community is actually going to allow more open economy and all that, I don't believe that you know, every sectors, and I don't even think that regulators are actually going to allow it to be as open as possible. Let me give you an example. In banking, for example, by 2020, banking is actually going to be open. But the thing is, I think by 2015, there will already be what they call the qualified ASEAN banks. And still, up until now, the regulators are still discussing about what is that going to be. I mean, who is actually going to be the qualified ASEAN banks and who is not going to be. So I think regulation is actually going to play a big part. So what I would like to understand is that what is it that our regulators in Indonesia is actually thinking, and based on, and that is actually one question, and what would be the impact on the players in each of the respective industries. And if you look at what is actually happening and what actually happened in other economic zones, for example, in Europe, I think Bruce, you mentioned something about, and I think you had direct experience in Europe, for example. What has been the responses of the different regulators in each of the countries, and what will be the impact of that on how soon is the ASEAN economic community is really going to come into effect? So those are the questions I have. Thank you.
Second question, okay, the lady.
Thank you. My name is Sinta. I'm from Indonesia. Services, Dialogue, and Logistics is one of my area of concern. I would like to listen from Pak Roni, because I see from the panel, Pak Roni is the pelaku usaha, the entrepreneur who actually deals with the whole supply chain. Maybe you can actually also share a little bit of experience of Trakindo. So I know Trakindo is very big from end to end. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sita. And the third, okay, the gentleman there.
Thank you. My name is Richard from Garuda Maintenance Facility Asia. I have a question to Mrs. Allison regarding your presentations that, if I'm not mistaken, that based on the fact that Singapore and Malaysia is the country who less enthusiasm in facing this integrations. In our industry, I mean in the aviation industry, it's in India the way around. I mean that Singapore especially is very aggressive in for these integrations, and they ask a lot about and there's so many opportunities in these integrations. And I think, can you explain about this data? The second is, again, maybe it's already mentioned by the first questioner from Mandiri regarding the regulations. In our industry also, we still discussing in these very tough discussions, especially for regulations, because every country have their own regulations that even we are referred to the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, but we still have differences, and it is difficult to endorse each other. That's how do you think about this? And then do you have any information or experience regarding this situation from EU? Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Richard. And you, for whom your question is?
From aviation, airline and maintenance, aircraft maintenance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now for the first, for Alison, you have 2 questions.
Okay, so let me, I'll take the first question and the last question. And I may take a bit of the second question. We had 4 questions. So on the winners, I mean, I think it's interesting. And if you look, there have been some people who've tried to do economic analysis of where the winners are going to be and look at sectorially, look at it by country. And you know, I think from an Indonesian perspective, clearly things related to consumer are areas that you can imagine that Indonesia would have advantage in, given that you have 41% of the consumer base in Indonesia, companies who already know consumers in Indonesia. So you could look at things like food, you could look at things like the drive for e-commerce, you could look at things, potentially parts of kind of the agricultural sector. Now, that being said, the question is whether or not those parts of the economy and those the companies today have are performing at the optimum level, and I think that's a separate question and something that probably needs to be addressed. But if you look at anything that touches consumer, I think anything that touches consumer is an area that Indonesia must take leadership on. When we look at regulation, and I have spent many years also in the financial services sector, and I think that it's a real challenge from a regulatory point of view. We know that there have been many discussions, and there's a committee looking at how you harmonise the regulation. But the reality is that the economies are really quite different, and because they're really quite different, and because of the role that financial services plays in the economy and the importance of financial services, particularly in growth economies, it's a real challenge in getting different regulators to come together to have kind of a harmonised view on things. My own view in dealing with regulators, not so much in this region but in Europe, is the only way that things will come together is to come together as industry, and then to come together as industry cross region, and that's a big challenge, because you're then dealing with competition challenges. So I think that financial services, I mean, for me, financial services is a big question mark in terms of how it comes together, and I think that there's a lot of work still to be done there from a kind of investment point of view, from a standardisation point of view. If I look to the question about the research and what came out from Malaysia and Singapore, it is interesting, and I really don't have the answers. But what I can say is when you speak with government or people in government agency, there is definitely very strong positive sentiment in Singapore and in Indonesia, and in Malaysia. So Singapore and Malaysia. So perhaps the government sentiment is stronger than in other places. The business sentiment, though, is not as strong. That's what our research is saying. So if you ask the business community do not feel it as strongly as in other markets. And I don't know why that is. I actually don't have an answer for that, but I can just tell you what our data kind of has shown us. What we do know is from experiences in other places. So if you kind of take the European experience, you find kind of typically that economies that have less advantage to start with gain disproportionately more, and that may be why you find more enthusiasm in Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, that it's an impetus to do something new. I actually don't have the answers to that, and we were kind of puzzling and discussing it a lot in both Thailand and Malaysia, exactly that point. There was a view that perhaps it was also a cultural perspective, so the view that kind of just naturally people in different places are a bit more cautious. But I don't have the answer for that. I wish push ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. The question is also for Bruce. So Bruce?
Thank you. So the first question, I'll start with the parallel with the European Union and then get into regulation because I think that that's connected. If we take just 10 seconds talking about how the European Union has been built to see how we can relate this to AEC. 1987, the AEC of Europe, which was called the Integration Act. 92, that's when the decision on having one single currency was actually made. But the single currency only happened in 1999 and 2002. Then a constitution was put for vote, a constitution for Europe in 2005, and it didn't happen, it was rejected. And then after that, a number of treaties happened to make Europe closer. So basically, if we compare AEC with Europe, right now we are in 1987. The main difference is that right from the start in Europe, there was something called directives, which means that any decision done at the federal level, or the union level, or the European community level, had to be translated into national laws. And as we mentioned earlier, right now, it's not the case yet. AEC is a framework. There is some indicative time frames that each country needs to go. There are differences between what Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore can do and what Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and the other countries can do. So it means that there is no immediate translation into regulations. The difference is the European Union is actually based on a political objective, to bring people together because of what has been happening for years. I think ASEAN has a political objective, but it's also an economy-driven. And I do believe that things will go faster with ASEAN. And that at some point there should be some sort of alignment in terms of regulation in different countries. Because as mentioned by Cindy, from a legal standpoint, a lot of those things will come into play when regulation laws are actually more aligned. So what does this mean, for instance? Let's take a couple of examples. And let's also understand what actually is the responsibility of Indonesia and the responsibility of ASEAN. If we look at what's happening in Europe, governments are not allowed to actually inject capital to companies for the sake of keeping, the fairness amongst all players in each industry. Today, if the Indonesian government wants to inject capital in Pertamina or in any other state-owned companies, or even in not state-owned companies, they can still do that, which will distort what the market will be. What we could anticipate is that after 2015, there will be more incentives to actually get things aligned, and the government will be less inclined to do things to not only protect its economy, but distort the market, which leads to less stability in growth and also in currency. The main illustration I would say is, let's take the example of subsidies. Oil subsidies in Indonesia that were decided for very good reasons a long time ago, and that have been debated for years without having been completely addressed by the government, and perhaps this new government is going to do that. Those subsidies that again were implemented for good reasons took away a lot of money that could have gone to construction of new refineries, for instance, or a number of other things. So that was value being taken away. AEC, in a second phase, by aligning what governments can do and cannot do, can actually accelerate the process of having individual governments making sure that and tackling issues in a more proactive and faster way. And that's regulation related because that leads to the ability to quickly act on something because you're being pressed not only by what's happening in your country, but what's happening in the rest of ASEAN. The last point I'd like to make is, even if AEC in Europe was in 97, this year in 2014, probably you heard about this company, a famous company in France called Alstom. The minute Siemens or GE was actually after this company, then all of a sudden you've got all sorts of protectionist remarks and nationalism remarks. And that is 30 to 40 years after. So this will always be the case. And I do believe that the future of AEC is in the ability to tackle those regulations, tackle things that haven't been tackled before, and more economic integration with directives like it's done in the EU.
Thank you, Bruce. The second question is from Ibu Sinta to Pak Roni. Your time, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Busita, for the question. Yes, indeed, it's quite a challenge to do a supply chain in the context of Indonesia market, whereby we have to have, or we have 5 million kilometers square to be covered, which 3 point something, it's 3 point something million square is covered with water. And then indeed, on top of that one, we also have over 15 or 13,000 islands spread out from Sabang to Merauke. So there is a challenge that we have to have from time to time. And then on top of that one, we have to ensure that the customer satisfaction is being achieved, whereby we have to deliver parts as well as the end product to the end customers on the timely manner. So it's quite a challenge. In the respect of Truck Indo experience, we have a number of branches that we have to cover the customers, but the challenge would be how we can distribute those 300,000 line item of parts. Then at the same time, we have to cover the customers in such a way that the availability as well as the coverage of the parts are available. So we have to have a very good in terms of planning, as well as procuring, sourcing, and then at the end we have to have a network distribution to cover this market. With this ASEAN Economic Community being in place at the end of 2015, we do have a lot of hope that it will be easier for us to bring the goods from ASEAN countries, as well as we are quick to also take the benefit in terms of regional sourcing, whereby we have a number of footprints throughout ASEAN, on top of the footprint that we currently have in the context of Indonesia. So it would be a more opportunity for us when it comes to the ASEAN Economic Community compared to the challenges. But again, as Kerry also pointed earlier, that doing logistics in Indonesia is not easy. So in terms of opportunity for the shipping and logistic providers, yes, there are a lot of opportunities, but then they also have to deal with the consistency in terms of the delivering the flow of the goods, of the information, as well as the flow of the document, whereby this flow of these three things have to be consistent and has to be reliable from time to time.
Thank you, Pak Roni. Mr. Richard, I do sorry, I can't heard your question. Would you please to repeat it again and to whom it is for? Mike, please.
Yeah, actually it's already answered by Ms. Alison. Yeah. First, that my questions about the enthusiasm from Singapore and Malaysia regarding these integrations. I mean the ASEAN economic integrations. From my point of view, especially my experience in our industry, aviation industry, Singapore is very aggressive. They are really want to have this integration soon as possible because they are ready. I think these two countries more ready compared with others in terms of, from my point of view in my industry. I mean, that's the data said different. That's why I just want to know. Maybe Ms. Alison Kennedy can answer it, but it's already explained before. And the second, actually, for the regulations. Again, it's already questioned by the first questioner that regulation is something that's quite tough to be discussed. I mean, in discussion that among us in the aviation industry, among the countries, because we have at the end should endorse all the regulation among us if we want to open this market. So the market can flow to every country, but again that every country have their own regulations. Even we have a same reference from ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, but it's still different. So the willingness of every country to accept and other country regulation is a very important thing, and we plan to have it in 2020, but I don't know. It is still tough discussion until now. Thank you.
Thank you, Parichan. This is for you, Alison.
Yeah, so on the first one, I had an attempt to answer before. On the second one, it does come back to, with regulation, particularly when you have highly competitive industry, it's a challenge, because on the one hand you need to come together to grow more, on the other hand you are with your competition, so there is opportunity and threat. On what you see, I mean, clearly for Singapore, being a travel hub, and that including airlines, I mean, because of the way the economy is planned, it's clear that this is very important to Singapore, and therefore you will see probably more enthusiasm because it's so strategic as an industry. So I mean, I think the question about what are the strategic industries for Indonesia coming out of AEC, where can Indonesia have comparative advantage, is something that probably needs to be explored more. On the broader regulation, so I think the industry needs to come together, but to the point I also made, it's not only about industry, it's about making it clear to people what the advantage is for them, and having people, having the population be clear that if you had open skies, if you have combined regulation, you have, for the average person in Jakarta who wants to travel, they are kind of better off if there is different regulation. So you need to kind of find a way to come together as an industry and lobby, I think, and that's challenging, again, because it's competitive, but also make the case much more. What is the advantage for the general population, or for the population that you target, of having AEC and of having these changes? And you almost need to have both, but it's not straightforward, and it will take time, and different industries will be able to operate more effectively than others.
Thank you, Alison. I know that there are much questions in your mind, but due to time restriction, due to the tight schedule, I have to finish this session. So thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Carrie, Cindy, Edison, and Roni. Thank you so much, everybody.